Look around my workshop. You see a table saw, a miter saw, a router table, a jointer, thousands of dollars of tools. They fill this whole space. Each one does its job really well. Now look at this. It's a small box. Inside is a tool that costs less than a fancy dinner, about 50 bucks. The claim? This one tool can replace almost everything else. I was skeptical. I mean, come on. A whole workshop and a handheld device? It sounds like a late-night infomercial. It sounds too good to be true. And you know what they say about things that sound too good to be true. So what is this miracle tool? It's the humble oscillating multi-tool. A lot of people see this and think it's just for cutting drywall, or maybe for scraping old paint. They think it's a specialty tool, not a woodworking powerhouse. I used to think that too. It just sits in the corner of the hardware store, often overlooked. But I kept hearing whispers. People online said it could do amazing things. So I decided to put it to the test. The challenge: build a complete project using only this $50 tool and its included blades. No table saw, no router, nothing else. Is that even possible? My first thought was, this is going to fail. I expected it to be slow. I expected the cuts to be messy and inaccurate. How could a vibrating blade possibly compete with a spinning table saw blade? It just didn't make sense in my head. I figured it would be terrible for making straight, long cuts. I thought shaping wood would be a nightmare. It would probably burn the wood or leave a horrible, fuzzy edge. I was ready for a complete disaster. But for 50 bucks, it was a disaster I was willing to risk for the sake of a good experiment. Let's see what happens. My plan was simple. I would start with the basics, breaking down a large piece of wood into smaller, manageable parts. This is where big saws shine. They are fast and powerful. Could this little guy even cut through a thick piece of pine? I grabbed a 1x6 board. I marked a straight line. I put on my safety glasses. I took a deep breath and turned the tool on. The buzzing sound filled the shop. It didn't roar like a table saw. It just hummed, waiting. It was time to find out if this $50 bet was a total bust or the beginning of something amazing. The first test was a simple crosscut. I needed a clean, straight cut across the board. Normally, I'd use my miter saw. It takes about 2 seconds. Zip, done. Perfect every time. I held the oscillating tool with its flat wood blade. I lined it up with my pencil mark. I plunged it into the wood. I was shocked. It sank in with almost no effort. Instead of fighting me, the blade sliced right through the wood fibers. It was slower than a miter saw for sure, but the control was incredible. I could see the line perfectly as I cut. The result was a surprisingly clean edge. Okay, one good cut could be a fluke. The next challenge was a rip cut. This means cutting along the grain of the wood. This is the table saw's job. It's a tough cut that requires power and a steady fence to keep it straight. I clamped a straight edge to my board to act as a guide. I ran the multi-tool along the guide. The tool buzzed along steadily. It wasn't as fast as a table saw, not even close. But it worked. The cut was straight. The edge was pretty clean, with just a little bit of fuzz. A quick pass with sandpaper would clean that right up. I was genuinely impressed. The real surprise was the lack of tear out. Tear out is when a saw blade rips out ugly chunks of wood on the edge of a cut. Big, fast spinning blades are famous for this, but the oscillating tool's blade moves back and forth very quickly over a tiny distance. It doesn't grab the wood and rip it. It slices it, almost like 1,000 tiny knives. This meant the surface of the cut was incredibly smooth, right from the tool. For delicate plywood, this would be a game changer. No more splintered edges to fix. This little tool was starting to win me over. So, where does it show its weakness? Speed. If you need to break down 10 large sheets of plywood, this is not the tool for the job. It would take forever. A circular saw or table saw is much, much faster for big jobs. But for a small project, for someone in an apartment with no space for big machines, the trade-off of speed for control, cleanliness, and a tiny footprint is amazing. It proved it could handle the basic cuts. Now it was time to move on to the fun stuff: shaping and detail work. This is where things would get really interesting. Now for the shaping test. I wanted to add a decorative curve to a piece of wood. Normally, I would grab my jigsaw or a bandsaw for this. Those tools are designed to cut curves. I drew a nice flowing arc on a piece of pine. I started cutting with the oscillating tool. At first, it felt a little strange. I had to guide the tool carefully, letting the blade do the work. But after a minute, I got the hang of it. I could make tight turns. I could follow the line with unbelievable precision. It was like drawing with a blade. The control was far better than a jigsaw, which can sometimes jump around. Next up, I wanted to try something a router would do. I needed to create a chamfer, which is a small 45-degree angle on the edge of the wood. This gives a project a finished, professional look. I didn't have a special bit. I just used the flat wood blade. I held the tool at a slight angle and carefully shaved away the corner. It was like using a power chisel. The blade removed thin slivers of wood, leaving behind a crisp, clean chamfer. It was so easy. You could do this to any edge to make it look fantastic. This was the moment I started to really believe. But the most shocking result came when I tried to make a small, detailed cutout. I needed to cut a square hole in the middle of a board. This is called a plunge cut. With most saws, you have to drill a hole first to get the blade started. Not with the multi-tool. I just placed the blade flat on the wood and turned it on. It plunged straight down into the material. No starting hole needed. I cut all 4 sides of the square from the middle of the board. The result was a perfect, clean square hole. This is something that is very difficult to do with most other tools. So where does it struggle? Fine sanding. The tool came with a sanding attachment, which is a small triangle. It's great for getting into tight corners where an orbital sander can't reach. But for sanding a large, flat surface like a tabletop, it's just too small. It would take a very long time and it might leave uneven marks. So, while it can sand in a pinch, it's not a replacement for a dedicated sander. But for shaping, detail work, and plunge cuts, this $50 tool wasn't just a replacement. It was better in some ways than the expensive tools. The ultimate woodworking test is joinery. This is how you connect pieces of wood together strongly. I decided to try a mortise and tenon joint, a classic and strong joint. The mortise is a square hole, and the tenon is a tongue that fits into it. I used the plunge cutting trick to cut the mortise. It was perfect. The square hole was clean and the sides were straight. For the tenon, I used the tool to carefully shave away wood from the end of another board until it fits snugly into the mortise. I couldn't believe it. I made a strong, tight-fitting joint with a $50 handheld tool. Could it do more? I tried cutting a dado, which is a groove cut across a board for a shelf to sit in. I used my straight-edge guide again and made 2 parallel cuts. Then, I used the blade to scrape out the wood in between. It worked like a charm. The shelf fit perfectly. This is a job that usually requires a special blade stack on a table saw or a router. The multi-tool did it with just its standard blade. This is huge for beginners or anyone on a budget. You don't need all that fancy gear to build strong, beautiful furniture. After all the cutting and joinery, I assembled my project, a small bookshelf. I used the sanding attachment to smooth the edges and get into the corners. As I predicted, it was slow for the large, flat tops of the shelves, but for all the detail work, it was fantastic. I put a simple coat of oil on it, and it looked great. A complete project, made from start to finish with one $50 tool. The people who can benefit from this are everywhere. People in small apartments, beginners who don't want to spend a fortune, or any woodworker who loves a clever, resourceful tool. In the end, this challenge taught me a huge lesson. We often get caught up in wanting the biggest, most expensive tools. We think we need them to do good work. But that's not true. Skill, creativity, and a little bit of patience are far more important than the price tag on your saw. This humble oscillating multi-tool proved that. It's not about what you have, it's about what you can do with it. So next time you're in the hardware store, don't just walk past the budget tools. you might be looking at your next favorite thing. And speaking of which, I just found a $30 tool that claims it can replace a lathe. You think we should try it?